take two. What's up, Watchdogs? It's Sean Henry here again with Media Windog Watchapeg and also with Winnipeg Alternative Media. It is once again time for another video. I'm going to try my best to keep this one fairly short and sweet, but there's, always a chance that I'm going to go off kilter and kind of get a little riled up and a little worked up and start to scream and shout and swear and curse and all that fun stuff. But I'm going to do my best to keep myself under control and keep this video as short and sweet as possible. Today's video is going to be about PCR tests. I know that all of the rage right now is what's going on with the election in the United States, but, COVID-19, despite what seems to be happening in the mainstream media, is kind of still a thing that needs to be discussed. So today we are going to watch a short 1:20 video here from an interview that Dr. Fauci gave, where they talked about PCR tests and the cycles of the PCR tests and how high or how low the cutoff point should be for the cycles of said PCR tests. And then we were going to read what I believe is a screenshot from an email that someone received from a provincial doctor at one of the provincial laboratories here in Manitoba who are testing and processing the PCR tests. Let's just jump into it. Let's just watch the video.
All right. There have been a number of reports of patients who shed viral RNA for weeks as determined by PCR. It doesn't seem to be infectious virus. And the real question is, are they a threat for transmission? And I'm wondering if you think we could use a cutoff of viral loads determined by PCR to say this patient is no longer infectious, can go home, can go to a nursing facility. Because right now the physicians are really having a hard time with that.
Right. Again, a good question. And what is now sort of evolving into a bit of a standard that if you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more, that the chances of it being replication competent are minuscule.
I hate to interrupt because it's a very short video and I don't want to jump into the middle of it, but I can't not just get so fired up and enraged at the fact that Dr. Fauci just said that this is now becoming an evolving bit of a standard, that these PCR tests might be too sensitive and that we should probably have a cutoff point for the sensitivity and the cycles of these PCR tests. Because as many of you watching this may know, but as some of you watching this may not know, I and many other people like myself that do things like this, that do similar things, actual independent alternative journalism, have been complaining and screaming about the PCR tests being too sensitive since March, since April. For 6 months or more, I've been crying out loud to everyone who will listen about the fact that these PCR tests are too sensitive and that they have too many cycles. Dr. Fauci himself just said anything above 35 cycles, anything 35 cycles or higher, results in a minuscule chance of being able to culture or replicate live viral load.
So that if somebody, and we have patients, and it's very frustrating for the patients as well as for the physicians. Somebody comes in and they repeat their PCR and it's like 37 cycle threshold. But you almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. So I think if somebody does come in with 37, 38, even 36, you got to say, it's just dead nucleotides, period.
So if someone comes in with their test, their PCR test, and they're testing at 36, 37, 38 cycles, it's almost exclusively going to be dead nucleotides, as Dr. Fauci called them, meaning that you are not carrying a significant amount of the live virus and you are likely not contagious or infectious to others, and you should be free to go about your fucking life. Now, the reason that I bring this up and the reason that this is so important is because we are now going to pop over to this screenshot, which I said is, I believe, a screenshot from an email that someone received from a provincial doctor here at one of the provincial laboratories. And it reads, "Your question has been forwarded to us here at Kadam Provincial Laboratory. You are correct that PCR is used to diagnose Manitobans with COVID-19. The number of amplification cycles has some slight variation between the different PCR tests used, but is generally 40. This has been the same since the pandemic started. Thank you, and I hope that answers your questions. Jared Bullard, MD, Pediatric Infectious Diseases and Medical Microbiology, Associate Medical Director of Kadam Provincial Laboratory, Associate Professor and Section Head of Pediatric Infectious Diseases, Pediatrics and Child Health and Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, University of Manitoba. So in this video that we just watched, Dr. Fauci says anything above 35 cycles or above, is too high, is too sensitive. And here we are reading in this screenshot that Manitoba laboratories are testing at 40 cycles and have been since the pandemic started. So, two things that I want to point out, and one question that I want to ask, is that one, we have been testing at too high a cycles. Manitoba has been testing at too high a cycles and has been testing with too sensitive a test since the pandemic began. So we've been having, assuming that that is correct and using that information we have available to us, that anything above 35 cycles is too sensitive, and we've been testing at 40 cycles since the pandemic began. That means that we have been having disproportionately high amounts of false positives since the pandemic began here in Manitoba. So anywhere from, and I've talked about this many times in previous videos and on previous live streams, anywhere from 50 to 90% of these PCR tests come back as false positive when you test with too many cycles or too high cycles. And now we know, according to Dr. Fauci, and again, I've been saying this for months, anything above 35 cycles is too high. Manitoba laboratories are testing at 40 cycles. So we've been testing with too many cycles and too sensitive a test since the pandemic began. So we've had disproportionately high amounts of false positives being marked down as COVID-19 cases since the fucking pandemic began, which means that a lot of the deaths that are getting, or at the very least some of the deaths that are getting marked down as COVID-19 deaths aren't legitimately COVID-19 deaths, because their positive PCR test that told them they had COVID-19 in the first place very well may have been inaccurate and a false positive. The second thing that I would like to point out, and I already kind of ranted and raved about this while we were watching the video, is that Dr. Fauci says this is a newly kind of evolving bit of a standard. And again, myself and people like Tim Pool, people like Steven Crowder, people like Ben Shapiro, people like the wonderful people that I work with at Winnipeg Alternative Media, Andy Brookshire and Todd McDougall and Good Branson, we've all been talking about this for 6 months or more, that these PCR tests should have a cutoff point for how sensitive they should be and how many cycles they should have. We've been talking about this for 6 months. Dr. Fauci is just saying now that this is becoming an evolving bit of a standard. So that being said, those first two things being said, my question that I want to end this video on is, why is it that a guy like me, who is just some idiot on Facebook who does this in his spare time just kind of for fun and for his own edification purposes, is 6 months further ahead of the game than Dr. Fauci, who is supposed to be the top top COVID-19 expert in the United States of America? How is that even remotely possible? To me, the answer is either corruption, incompetence, or a little bit of both. And I'm going to end this video here. I would like you to ask yourselves this same question. How is it that people like Sean on YouTube, who's just a guy, is talking about these types of things a full 6 months or more before Dr. Fauci is starting to talk about these things? So the thing that I'm going to end this video on is a wonderful quote that I heard in a video that I was watching the other day surrounding all the craziness around the election coverage and the election just shenanigans in general, is that the real pandemic that we are facing this year, whether it be in Canada, the United States, or pretty much everywhere and anywhere in the world, the real pandemic that we are facing this year is a pandemic of failed leadership. Our leaders and our elected officials and our politicians and our presidents and our prime ministers and our health experts and authorities have let us all down repeatedly, nonstop this entire year, almost exclusively. So the real pandemic that we are facing this year is not a pandemic of COVID-19. It's not a pandemic of fraud in our elections. It's not a pandemic of corruption in our leadership, although I'm sure that's playing a role. The main thing that we are witnessing this year is the pandemic of failed leadership. Silver lining to that is that hopefully it will help people realize that you should absolutely not blindly place trust and faith in these leaders and these authority figures, because they clearly aren't any better at doing this than the rest of us. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to, and we're going to start to wrap this up here. But again, we just watched this video and we read this screenshot from the doctors at Kadam Provincial Laboratory and the doctor from the University of Manitoba saying that we are testing at 40 cycles and have been since the pandemic began, which is too high by at least 5 cycles, according to Dr. Fauci, who just realized this now, whereas people like myself have been talking about the fact that the PCR tests have been too sensitive for 6 months or more at this point. And you have to ask yourself the question, how is that possible? How is it possible that this random dude that I'm watching on Facebook and YouTube is 6 months ahead of the game compared to the top infectious disease and COVID-19 expert in the United States? How is it that our leaders, and why is it that our leaders and our authorities and our experts have so consistently and continuously dropped the ball and fucked everything up this entire year? That's food for thought. Again, don't blindly listen to or follow authorities and experts and leaders, because a lot of the time, they don't deserve it. And if you need any more evidence of that, just go and look at everything that's happened in 2020. So we're going to end this video here. Please share this around, because now we have more or less concrete proof that Manitoba is creating a false pandemic and has been since the beginning. So please share this around and make people aware of the fact that Manitoba laboratories are testing at least 5 cycles too many, and it's absolutely going to be resulting in false positives, and is going to be artificially inflating all the COVID-19 numbers. Share it around, make everyone as aware of this as possible. If you like the job that I did, leave a like on the video, go to the comments, tell me how you thought I did, let me know what you think of the job that I did. Please hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I upload new content. Go to my channel and subscribe. Go to my Facebook page, Media Windog Watchapeg, and follow me and like me there. Also, make sure you go and check out Winnipeg Alternative Media on Facebook and YouTube. I work with them a lot as well, so go and follow and like and subscribe and all that good shit with them as well. And we will talk to you guys soon for the next video. Ciao, ciao.